Hello, my name is Marcus Ruiz Evans. I am president of the Calexit movement, and I created the idea with my book, California's Next Century 2.0, written in 2011 and published in 2012. I have typically talked about California and California values and how they're different from America for close to 10 years. One of the major reasons that I push for Calexit and that I educate people to push for Calexit is that California values are not American values. And they're so different that oftentimes we cannot achieve the things that we want by being part of America. Today, I have an unpopular message. I'm going to tell you right now, this is not going to be something you want to hear or see. You're not going to like me for saying it. You're not going to appreciate this video. You probably won't want to share it. You won't want to hear it. You might think I'm a bad person, but everything I'm about to tell you is a fact. Everything. And I'll walk you through all the citations as I always do. We can call it inconvenient truths, awkward facts, things you don't want to hear but are true. First off, I'll give you a little bit of heads up of where we're going to go just so that you can tell ahead of time. So first, we're going to talk about how racism is against an entire ethnic group is being called for by California people and California companies. That is not a California value. That is an American value. Secondly, we're going to talk about how California has a history of building bridges while Americans build walls. That's what our governor said, and we're not living up to our values again. People here are calling for hate against an entire ethnic group, and people here are calling for the destruction of bridges and building of walls. Those two things are not our values. We're also going to talk about racism in Ukraine and how supporting racist regimes or people who tolerate racism is not a California value. And finally, in our most unpopular segment, I'm sure, and this is my opinion and no one else takes responsibility for this, I'm going to point out how, yes, Vladimir Putin is a bad man for doing what he's doing. Yes, he should not do it. Yes, it's wrong, criminal, evil, dastardly, and bad and wrong. And America's absolutely no better. I'll walk you through all of it. I'm going to have facts. Nobody will be able to deny anything I'm saying. And if you think that you can, come and debate me live on the show. Marcus.Ruiz, that's Marcus, period Ruiz, period EVANS @gmail.com. That's Marcus.Ruiz.Evans@gmail.com. I invite anybody to comment or debate me live or to make comments and I'll debate them anytime, any place, anywhere. Let's go. Because what you're going to find out is that you can't debate me. You may not like what I have to say, but everything's backed by facts. That's how I got this far, was making radical claims that people thought were not true and turned out to be true. I'm going to say some things that are going to upset some people. I get that, but I believe in myself for this reason. I've made a lot of claims early on that were unpopular when they were made and then turned out to be true. So when the Iraq war happened, I said, this is a bad war. It will not benefit America. It's a bad thing. It's going to look bad for America, and it's not going to work for the Iraqi people, and there will not be democracy in Iraq. When I said that, people hated me for saying that, and it turned out to be completely correct. When Kamala Harris was elected, I said, she's a horrible choice. She's a racial sellout. She'll do nothing for minorities, and she'll make minority women look bad by her placement. Again, highly unpopular when I said it, and it turned out to be completely true. So I'm going to make another unpopular estimate and prediction, and I'm sure that it's going to come out to be true in the future. Let me walk you through everything so that you can see it. So first off, we're going to start off with allowing hate speech at an entire ethnic group is not a California value. So Meta platforms will allow Facebook and Instagram, two California companies built here in California, users in some countries to call for violence against Russians and Russian soldiers March 10th. Now, if you want to talk about violence against soldiers in a war zone, I get it. But these posts by Facebook and Instagram say that it's okay to talk about hate speech against Russians themselves. It's okay to hate on an entire ethnic group and preach about hate and violence against an entire ethnic group. Yes, California companies changed their hate speech policies recently to allow that. That's not a California value. Removing hate speech guidelines is not a California value, and allowing hate against an entire ethnic group is not a California value. Now, when I talked about this initially, people said, Mark, you're overreacting. They're just talking about Russian soldiers. I said, no, The post says you can call for violence against Russians and Russian soldiers. If it was just military, you would say the Russian military. We call for violence against the Russian military. Complete statement. Okay, that means people involved in military activities for the Russian government. That's not what the statement said. It said violence against Russians and Russian soldiers. Russians and Russian soldiers means Russian people, anywhere. Now, when I said that, people said I was wrong and I was exaggerating and I didn't get that right. But interesting thing happened was we are now narrowing the focus to make it explicitly clear in the guidance that it's never to be interpreted as condoning violence against Russians in general. So if I was wrong, why did Facebook have to clear that up? They allowed a statement saying it's okay to hate on Russians and Russian soldiers. And they said, everything's fine. People are going to get what we mean. And then 4 days later, they had to go, well, we did not mean hate on Russian people. Why'd you make the statement that it's okay to hate on Russians? And then why'd you have to clear it out a few days later? Unless you knew damn well that's what you did. You said it was okay, and you allowed the wording to be out there, California companies, to hate on an entire ethnic group. You did that. Let me show you some of the references so you can see we're telling the truth here. This is my other favorite. Oh, here we go. First, Facebook allows war posts urging violence against Russian invaders. Meta platforms will allow Facebook and Instagram users in some countries to call for violence against Russians and Russian soldiers, aka violence against an ethnic group. Yes, they said it. And in fact, that's the way people took it, because just a few days later, they had to clear it up saying, whoops, what we meant was we're making it explicitly clear that guidance is never to be interpreted as condoning violence against Russians in general. Why did you have to make that statement clearing that up? Here we go. Part 2, a heartless and stupid plan to punish Russian students for Putin's invasion. Democratic lawmakers have swung behind a deranged plan to kick out kids of the U.S. that mirrors the Trump-era policies they previously decried. Think about that carefully. Here's the Californian doing it. His name is Eric Swalwell. He works in Congress and he represents California. Californians loved him when he talked trash on Trump for Trump's racist policies. But now Swalwell himself is advocating a racist policy that sounds a lot like Trump. Let's get this straight. Californian is famous for calling out Trump for his racism and discrimination. And then that same Californian says, well, now that Trump's gone, let's discriminate against an entire ethnic group, which is something Trump would say. Here we go. Frankly, I think closing their embassy in the United States, which isn't that bad, that happens all the time, and kicking every Russian student out of the United States, they should be on the table. That's what California Congressman Eric Swalwell said. So if you're a Russian student, you should be kicked out and denied an education. So that's called collective punishment. And the last time that was seen was World War II against the Jews. So what we have now is Californians calling for violence against Russian people and saying it's okay, and California is calling for collective ethnic punishment against an entire ethnic group. Now, Swalwell said, let's ban all Russian government officials, let's close down the embassy. Fine, totally fine. And if Facebook said calling for violence against the Russian military, fine. But that's not what they did. They talked about banning all Russian people and violence against all Russian people. That's hate of an entire ethnic group. That is not a California value at all. And every Californian who's supporting this or allowing this to go on should be disgusted with themselves, because this is not a California value. Show me where we stood for hate against an entire ethnic group and banning an entire ethnic group. That's Trump talk. And now we're doing it right after we got done talking about how Trump was so horrible for doing the exact same thing. Okay. Let's go to part 2. So cutting off all connections with the country is not a California value. We build bridges to America's enemies to keep dialogue going and move towards peace. And that is a California value. As our governor routinely said, Americans build walls and Californians build bridges. Now, I'm not excusing what Russia did, and I'm not saying that it's okay. But I'm saying that the concept of cutting off all connections with another country in order to punish them is an American concept. And keeping dialogue with the country, regardless of what they do, to encourage them to have better actions is a California concept. I really don't care if you agree with me or not. This is what we've done for decades. This is our culture. As Governor Jerry Brown said, Americans build walls and Californians build bridges. That's what we do. Let me show you a couple examples here. So they want to cut off all California companies, cut off ties from Russia. That's what the Los Angeles Times is calling for recently. But here's the thing. Another potential complication is that such an action against the foreign nation can make it harder for the federal government to negotiate an end to sanctions in the future. The Obama administration ran into this problem when negotiating with sanctions in Iran. Because California had already cut off ties with Iran, when the Obama administration wanted to reach a peaceful agreement with Iran, it had trouble doing so because California cut off ties with Iran, and therefore the federal government couldn't automatically say all ties will be renewed. So when California cuts off ties with other countries, it actually helped stop peaceful negotiations to end the problem with that regime. We saw this with Iran, and now we're going to run into it with Russia. But here's the other thing. Here's our governor, Jerry Brown. Jerry Brown, contributor, and William J. Perry, the guy who helped the Cold War against Russia. October 2017, a call for Russia and the U.S. to cooperate in protecting against nuclear terrorism. So Russia just directly interfered in the American elections in 2016. And at that time, people thought that he rigged the elections and had Donald Trump become president, which didn't happen. They influenced the elections, but nobody's saying how much they changed votes. So Russia directly attacked America. Directly interfered in the elections and directly, according to Americans at that time, changed the election results. What did our governor do? He traveled to Russia to talk to them. And he said that America and Russia should keep ties together so that we don't have war and that we work through this process. Russia hasn't even attacked America this time. They attacked another country. And yet we want to cut off all ties to them. But when Russia directly attacked America, California's stance was don't cut ties with them and build better ties so that we can communicate with them and bring them around. That happened. California value. Our governor did it, and you didn't criticize him for doing it. So why is that not a California value now when Russia hasn't attacked California? Why is it then when we're under less threat by Russia, we're more hardcore against them and more against our traditional California values? When California was attacked by Russia by interfering in the election and putting in Trump, which Californians didn't like, our governor, a year later, was still saying, keep ties together. I want to point out another story. So this goes back to 1988, Los Angeles Times, 1988. And what it points out is that the Esalen Institute is a California think tank. It's based on the coast. And then in the 1980s, they started reaching out to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had nuclear missiles pointed at California and America and was ready to kill us all. How did Californians respond to a direct threat of death by Russians? We reached out to them and said, let's have ties. In 1986, the Esalen Institute created a communication with the Soviet Union, which was still there, still had nukes pointed at us and still talked about killing Americans, and said, let's work together. They started working on writers groups and then science groups. And then eventually they started reaching out to Soviet Union officials. Glasnost, or the end of the Cold War, was because of the Esalen Institute here in California. It's a little known story you probably don't know much about. Here's the evidence. The Soviet-American exchange program started in 1979 by the Esalen Institute. And basically, they had built the bridge by 1982, 1989. Boris Yeltsin came over to Big Sur here in California. The point is that the end of the Cold War the war that almost obliterated all life on Earth between the Soviet Union and America, was not because of Americans, but because of Californians. Ronald Reagan was a Californian, and he had a different opinion about meeting with them, even though he enlarged the military. That was seen as weird, but he did meet with them and talk about glasnost and peace. And he said, I believe, I'm drawing a blank, the guy with the tattoo, the birthmark on his forehead. And that was seen as very weird, but Reagan was a Californian who did that. The Esalen Institute was the only place in America to reach out to the Soviet Union, build meaningful connections in their literary and scientific communities, and eventually reach out to Soviet leaders, which brought down the Cold War. So the Cold War ended because California kept bridges with an enemy of America. So Soviet Union has nuclear missiles pointed at America. It's actually killed Americans, and it's an existential threat to Americans, and said it wants to kill Americans. And how did California respond? We built bridges to them. And what did that do? Bring down the whole thing, because we kept dialogue going. And what did our governor do? Right after Russia interfered in our elections directly, said, let's keep dialogue with them. You may get mad at what I'm saying, but the fact is that Russia directly attacked us in the elections, and we built bridges with them. The Soviet Union was almost ready to kill everybody in America, and Californians built bridges with them. And the result was more peace and prosperity for everybody. Now that Russia's not even directly attacking California, we're talking about expelling all Russian ethnic people, calling for the death of Russian ethnic people wherever they are, and cutting off all ties to Russians. How does that match our California history? Again, I said this was going to be unpopular, but if you want to debate me, you're going to need to point out how these were California values and we did something aligned with the way that we're behaving today in the past. It's not there. In fact, our previous behavior was to do the total opposite. Yeah, I noticed right when I said that, somebody left. But hey, unpopular truth, I get you don't want to hear it. These are all facts. You can look it up yourself. So let's go into racism in Ukraine. Something nobody really wants to hear, but I'm going to walk you through it. So here's some of the things you're not really going to want to hear, but are true. So this comes from Think Progress, but that's the NBC News symbol. So this was on NBC News. That's not Fox. That's not a right-wing think tank. Ukraine's Nazi problem is real, even if Putin's denazification claim isn't. Not acknowledging this threat means that little is being done to guard against it. So for those of you who don't like when people bring up the racist problems in Ukraine, you're helping racism to stay in Ukraine. You're helping white supremacy to stick around. NBC News is saying that. That's not a right-wing publication, and it's certainly not Joe Bob's blog, as I like to say. NBC News is saying, look, there's a real Nazi problem there. America's ignoring that, and that helps the Nazis. There it is. Let's go over some of the highlights. So this is the Azov Brigade. This is a Nazi double lightning bolt. It was very famous by the SS Guard, the ones who rounded up the Jews in Eastern Europe and killed them. It's called the Azov Brigade. Let's go on to this. So, of course, Putin is lying and exaggerating the threat. Of course, not saying Putin's a good guy or that everything he's doing is right or fine. Here's my favorite one. So in World War II, Ukraine had one of the largest Jewish communities in Europe, an estimated 2.7 million. A remarkable number considering the territory's long period of anti-Semitism and pogroms. By the end of World War II, more than half of the Jews would perish. So 2.7 million Jews in Ukraine, half, about 1.35 million Jews were wiped out by the Ukrainians in order to be nice to the Nazis who came in. When German troops took Kiev in 1941, they were welcomed by Heil Hitler banners. Soon after, nearly 34,000 Jews were rounded up and killed in what was known as the Holocaust by bullets. So when we're talking about Ukraine, Hitler came in, the Ukrainian people said, good guy, welcome Hitler, this is your town. Oh, do you hate Jews? We'll help you kill 1.3 million of them. By the way, they never apologized for that, and they never said that was wrong, and they still have statues up to those guys who did that. We'll continue. You can see. The Babin Yar ravine continued to fill up as a mass grave with about 100,000 people murdered there. That was the largest single killing site of the Holocaust outside Auschwitz. Researchers have noted that key locals fulfilled a role in the Nazi kill orders at the site. Nowadays, Ukraine has about 56,000 to 140,000 Jews, and their prime minister or president is a Jew, so a lot of people don't want to hear there's anything about that. But this is what grabs me. All right, watch this sentence right here. Nowadays, Ukraine counts between 56,000 and 140,000 Jews who enjoy freedoms and protections never imagined by their grandparents. That includes an updated law passed last month criminalizing anti-Semitic acts. If the president of the country is a Jew and they're pro-Jewish and not anti-Semitic, how come they couldn't get to punishing anti-Semitic acts until last month? This guy's been president for a couple of years. World War II ended 70 years ago. If they're so pro-Jewish and pro-Jewish people, why did it take them till last month to ban anti-Semitic acts? That's weird. It came as there was a pronounced uptick in public displays of bigotry, including swastika-laden vandalism of synagogues and Jewish memorials, and eerie marches in Kiev and other cities that celebrated the Waffen SS. So they got neo-Nazis running around, putting swastikas on synagogues and doing marches celebrating the SS. And although they're so pro-Jewish, they couldn't get to banning that until last month, even though they've been talking about how they're a Western country and aligned with Western values for years, and even though they've had a Jewish prime minister for years. Interesting. Here we go. Ukraine has in recent years, not historically, erected a glut of statues. That means a lot of statues honoring Ukrainian nationalists whose legacies are tainted by their indisputable record of Nazi proxies. So you have an increased uptick in Nazi swastikas on Jewish synagogues, an increase of attack on marches celebrating the Waffen SS recently. You also have an increase of nationalist Ukrainians who supported the Nazis and the Holocaust getting statues. And that's all in recent times while there's a Jewish prime minister. So the news keeps going, Jewish prime minister. Okay, but upticks against Jews are up. And you couldn't ban anti-Semitism until recently. And there's marches celebrating the SS recently. And you erected even more statues celebrating the Nazis recently. You see the pattern here? Ukraine has several dozen monuments and scores of street names glorifying the Nazi collaborator, enough to require 2 separate Wikipedia pages. Yeah, okay. Statues have also been raised for Yaroslav Stetsko, a one-time chair of the OUN, who wrote, "I insist on the extermination of the Jews in the Ukraine." Far-right groups have also gained political currency in the past decade, none more chilling than Svoboda, politically, whose leader claimed the country was controlled by a Muscovite Jewish mafia. That's Svoboda, a political party. A recognized political party is attacking Jews, and they get a sit in parliament. And just to be clear, and they have several members in the Ukrainian parliament. One of those guys sitting in the Ukrainian parliament said the Holocaust was a bright period in human history, and he sits in parliament. Now here's the Azov Battalion, which is a avowed white supremacy group whose national purpose was to rid the Ukraine of Jews. In 2018, U.S. Congress stipulated there would be no aid to that group to provide arms training or other assistance to the Azov Battalion. However, though, the Azov Battalion is now an official member of the Ukrainian National Guard. So when America sends $800 million worth of weapons to the Ukraine military, that means these guys. Let's see. I think you get some of the points. So you have racist statues going up. You have an avowed white supremacist organization, militia, that's intact and is officially part of the official military forces of Ukraine. And you have seating members in Congress who are white nationalists. Now, when I talk to friends and family about this, They say, well, don't we have racists here in America? True, we do. But here's the thing. We just got done with 4 years of tearing down every single Confederate statue. Ukraine has been putting up racist statues to Nazis while we have been tearing down racist statues. Ukraine has an actual white nationalist sworn brigade as part of their official military. We have nothing like that. So the Aryan Brotherhood is probably the largest militant group in America of white supremacists. Mostly they're located in prisons. Nobody said, hey, white supremacist Aryan Brigade, form a militia and we'll let you into the U.S. military. We also have racist militias in Minnesota, Michigan, and in the Midwest who celebrate white supremacy, don't like minorities, and they're militias. Nobody said, hey, racist militia of the Midwest, why don't you become an official part of the U.S. military? That's what they did in Ukraine. So in America in the last few years, we've said that white supremacy is one of the top domestic extremist issues. And in America, we said that white supremacy militias are a major problem. That's what the FBI said. But in Ukraine, they said white supremacist militias are all cool and can join the National Guard. So, I mean, America, no Confederate statues. They all have to be removed. Ukraine, let's build new racist statues at the same time America's taking down racist statues. America, domestic extremism of white supremacists and white supremacist militias is one of the top domestic policing issues according to the CIA and FBI. Ukraine, we allow these white militias to actually join our military forces. Also, at the same time, the Pentagon is trying to remove white supremacists from our military. Ukraine saying we recognize them. Secondly, in America, we have removed sitting members of Congress for saying racist things. And in Ukraine, they have a section of their parliament dedicated to the Waffen SS. What I like to point out to people is this. Imagine in Congress, there's about 400 members of Congress. Let's say 50 members of Congress sat wearing full Nazi uniforms with the double lightning bolt and SS star, black uniform, and then the hat with the skull and the SS, which meant they're cool with exterminating minorities. So imagine 50 people in Congress wearing SS Nazi uniforms and sitting there. And imagine an African-American legislator sits next to them, and a Mexican legislator and a Jewish legislator. And they pass paperwork back and forth to these people and, shake their hand and carry voting rolls to them and talk to them as a fellow colleague. Would that ever happen here? I mean, would a black person, Mexican person, Jewish person, white person in Congress be allowed to turn to a group of neo-Nazis wearing SS uniforms and work with them casually? And then when they're asked about the news, go, well, I don't support them. I'm not a Nazi. I don't support them. I just work with them in Congress. Would we ever have 50 members of Congress in SS uniforms? No, we wouldn't. What if the Aryan Brotherhood, which is a militia, said that they want to be recognized by the U.S. government as the fifth military branch, or the sixth? So you have Space Force, National Guard, Coast Guard, Marines, Navy, Air Force. And they go, we want to be the sixth one, called the Domestic White Supremacist Militia. And we expect to be recognized in every Pentagon parade, and we expect to get military funding directly from the Pentagon for our white supremacist militia. Would that ever happen? I mean, the president comes on TV and says, our military includes these multiple branches plus the white supremacist militia that, they're small, they're not most of the military funding, but we're going to give them a 10th or 5% of the funding. Would black people, brown people, Jewish people ever allow that in America? Significant national defense funding to go to an official white supremacist militia? Would we allow all the Confederate statues to stay up? What if somebody said, I want to build 2 times the number of Confederate statues in America, and they pushed for that the last couple of years? Would that be allowed? No. Let me show you a couple examples just to prove what I'm talking about. Oh, yeah. 100 Confederate monuments removed. Biden's Secretary of Defense is moving to purge the military of white supremacists. Steve King was removed from his committee assignments for saying something that's white supremacy-like. So in America, we tear down racist statues. We seek out white supremacists in the military and we remove them. And we ban people from Congress who say anything racist. In Ukraine, they allow a significant section of their Congress to be white supremacists and Nazi lovers. They allow official Nazi organizations to officially be part of their military, and they have created even more statues to racism. And they've stepped up the discrimination against Jewish people. And we're supposed to believe none of that's a problem because there's a Jewish prime minister. Again, why did you not ban anti-Semitism until last month when you've been Jewish your whole life and president for years? Supporting a country that has these ties to white supremacy and not calling them out at all and acting like it doesn't exist is not a California value. It is not. Let's talk a little bit more about racism in Ukraine. So here in Ukraine, open the door, we die. Africans report racism and hostility trying to flee Ukraine. Thousands of African immigrants joining throngs of Ukrainians try to flee the country, say they faced red tape and discrimination. Alexander Somoto Ora, 25, was among thousands of people crowded in a Kiev train station Friday, hoping to flee Ukraine amid the Russian invasion. He said he and his friends hoped to get to safety at the Polish border quickly, but that officials wouldn't allow the group of Africans to board trains out of the region. I was like, you're picking only white people, Ora said. He said he and his friends briefly made it onto the second train headed to Poland, but were quickly kicked off with officials telling the term Ukrainians only. I said, you say Ukrainians only, but I don't see you checking passports. I see you picking white people only. The train was not filled before they left, but they never picked us. If Ukraine doesn't have a racism problem and there's only a few racists in the military and a few racists in Congress and more racist statues going up, but that really doesn't represent them, why are thousands of Africans saying they're being discriminated against by Ukrainians for not being white? This is at a train station with regular Ukrainians. Why aren't the Ukrainians treating them better? How come that happened? We're supposed to believe there's no race issue in Ukraine. These are isolated incidents. Not to these African immigrants. Why are they saying they're discriminated against? But it doesn't stop there. Syrian refugees are crying afoul at the racist media coverage of the Ukraine media. Western journalists stereotype refugees as people of color only, Hassan Al-Kantor says. This is getting a lot of publicity and I love seeing it. In one example, a CBS correspondent in Kyiv says in a live report, this isn't a place, with all due respect, like Iraq or Afghanistan, that has seen conflict raging for decades. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European country where you wouldn't expect that or hope that it's going to happen. So you have a lot of reporters who are talking about these Ukrainians are like us. They look like us Europeans. This isn't like the backwards Middle East. What do you mean by that? Do you mean Ukrainians look white? And that's why it's okay to come to their aid? You know, a lot of Syrian refugees were not allowed in, but Ukrainian refugees are allowed in without being vetted. So Syrian refugees, you're Muslim, you're brown, you have to be vetted, and we're worried that you're terrorists. Ukrainian refugees, come on in. You don't need to be vetted. That's what's happening now. Why is the difference between how white people and brown people are being treated? And why are white journalists from America supporting white, predominantly Ukraine, even though there's this history of racism in Ukraine? It's almost like white people prefer white people and don't want to talk about when white people nations do racist things because they see them as fellow whites. This is going on, folks. Major American reporters, BBC reporters are talking about how this is so weird to see white people have this happen to them. And a lot of countries in Europe and America are saying, bring all those white people in, but not those brown people. Facts. And I can see the count went down from 2 to 1. It's fine. In the next couple months, you'll see everything that I said was true, although you didn't want to hear it. That's what we do here. We bring up inconvenient truths. White people supporting white people to the detriment of brown people is not a California value. That's another one. And finally, just to sink it in and make myself thoroughly unpopular, forgetting America's warmongering is not a California value. So when America went into the Vietnam War, the most protests against the Vietnam War were here in California. When America went into the Iraq War under W. Bush, the most protests in America were here in California. The first state to ban military recruiting in its schools so that we didn't support the American war machine was here. The anti-war movement started here. The most number of activists against American militarism is here in California. But now what we hear is Russia bad, let's punish them, let's send weapons in. You had Nancy Pelosi almost drooling on national TV about how she wanted to blow up Russians. That's not a California value. That's what Americans do. Americans are warmongers. We're not. I'm not excusing what Russia does, but I'm saying the let's go kill them and send weapons and blow them up is America type thinking and not California type thinking. And here's the other thing. America's no better than Putin. I know you don't want to hear that. Let me explain. There was a guy called George W. Bush. He too was unelected. The Supreme Court placed him in power. That's not normal. That's not legal, and it's not democracy. Secondly, his cousin in Florida called the election early, which helped push voters to him. And his brother, who was governor of that thing, oversaw the election recount. So he had nepotism controlling the election recount. He had nepotism pushing the election his way. And he had family connections getting the entire legal system to install him as president. That's George W. Bush. He's not elected, didn't pass a democratic election, just like Vladimir Putin. Then George W. Bush wanted to invade the country of Iraq. He lied to everyone in the world about weapons of mass destruction. He violated international norms by invading that country. He permanently destabilized the entire Middle East region, which led to the ISIS here. And it was an illegal war because it was not with a UN authorization. Secondly, when they got in there, they killed 500,000 to 1 million civilians. I'm looking at the death tolls in Ukraine, and they're under 10,000 civilians killed. America got 500,000 to 1 million civilians. And let me point this after I talked to my dad, who was in the military. He goes, those weren't all terrorists? No. Those were civilians. America killed civilians, not terrorists shooting at them, civilians who were caught up in the action, to the tune of 500,000 to 1 million civilians dead from collateral damage. Russia has done less than 10,000 in Ukraine. We're talking about war crimes tribunals for Putin. Where are the war crimes tribunals for the Americans? We had an unelected leader. We violated a country. We didn't follow UN resolutions. We violated international norms. We got 500,000 civilians killed, and nobody in America has been brought to justice. And in fact, George W. Bush got a hug from Michelle Obama. So nobody's brought to justice. Nobody's brought on war crimes tribunals. In fact, Americans don't even really want to talk about how they lost 500,000 civilians in Iraq from an illegal invasion. And when I bring it up to people, they don't even aware. They're not even aware. They're like, how many did we kill? So Russia, all bad. America literally does the exact same thing. Nobody's held to account. Nobody wants to talk about that, and nobody remembers that. I can't tell you the number of conversations where I pointed out, here's everything Putin did, and it's wrong and bad, and I completely agree. And here's what we did with the Iraq war, exact same thing. People have these glazed eyes, like, what, huh? So Bush was unelected. We violated the international law. We violated international norms. There was no reason for the invasion. It destabilized an entire region. War crimes were committed, and nobody was held to account. How's that different from Putin? Again, let me write out my email. The name is Marcus Ruiz Evans at gmail.com. If you feel anything I said was factually incorrect, come and get me. But not, I don't like your opinion. Your facts are wrong. I talked about a lot of facts pointing out California history and California values and duplicity of Californians and why we're buying bad American culture. And this is the point. America's a bad influence on California. Why do you think we're violating California norms, like hating on an ethnic group, punishing an entire ethnic group, calling for violence of an ethnic group, saying that it's not holding our own officials to account, and then joining in the warmongering against another country? Those are American culture ideas. Those ideas didn't come from us. The impetus, the catalyst for all these concepts came from America. So I've just shown you how, whether you like it or not, whether you want to hear it or not, American culture is bad for California and encourages bad things that are against our California values. If you got a problem, if you think I'm saying anything wrong, my facts are wrong, I look forward to debating you live, and I expect you to point out how my facts are incorrect. Let's go to comments, see if there's any good ones. If you have any comments, if you think any of my facts are wrong, now's the time to point that out. I've walked you through the facts. I've walked you through the statistics. I've shown you what California values were in the past, what made us who we are before now, and how we're violating those things. My conclusion is that American culture is bad for California and encourages us to do bad things. And I get you don't want to hear this now. But what I'm also expecting is in the next couple months, everything I'm saying, you'll eventually come to see true. I called out Kamala Harris. I called her a vendetta the day she was elected, and everything I said has only come to pass. We also said that America is a country that likes Trump values in 2016. Nobody in California wanted to hear that. It's 2022. Trump's likely going to run for re-election again. The Republican Party has not booted him out and is still wedded to him. Exactly what we predicted in 2016. So we have a history here at Calexit of making predictions people don't want to hear and being 100% correct. I will include this in that category of predictions. Thank you and have a good evening.